Good evening. I'm Alexis Lekakis. The topic of tonight's discussion is Iran. Iran elected a new president, Masoud Pezeshkian. We have tonight with us Professor Mohammad Marandi. He's a very knowledgeable person. He is from Iran. He lives in Iran, which is very important. And we have the pleasure to have him here with us. He is a professor of English literature and Orientalism at the University of Tehran. Besides being an academic, he is also a veteran of the Iran-Iraq War. Besides that, he is a former media advisor to the Iranian nuclear negotiating team in Vienna. And he has appeared as a commentator and analyst in major international news networks. Professor Marandi, welcome to our show. Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you very much.
We would be really interested to listen to your take about Iran's new president, Masoud Pezeshkian, who is considered to be a reformist. We know reformist is a really generic term. Please help us understand more.
I would call President-elect Pezeshkian a centrist reformist. He is at the center of Iranian politics, somewhat similar to Dr. Raisi, who was also a centrist. I would say that Dr. Raisi was a centrist principalist, and Dr. Pezeshkian would be a centrist reformist. And that would make them actually quite similar in many ways. So Dr. Raisi's big and major legacy in Iran is that he expanded Iran's ties with the global South quite significantly and quite rapidly. Under his presidency, Iran joined the Shanghai Cooperation Organization and BRICS, and also enhanced relations with Central Asia and countries in our own region, the Persian Gulf, as well as Africa, Latin America, and Asia. And this is something that President Raisi wants to pursue as well. So in that respect, we see a similarity. President Pezeshkian is similar to President Raisi in that respect. And in addition, President Pezeshkian wants to see if we can have a solution or find a solution for the nuclear issue. And he has said that if the United States makes the right choices, we can have a deal. But he also said if the United States is unwilling to make the right choices, we have other options. That too is similar to Dr. Raisi. In fact, President-elect Pezeshkian's opponent in the second round of the elections was critical of Dr. Raisi's negotiations with the West, and he is also critical of any potential future negotiations. So Dr. Raisi is actually and Dr. Pezeshkian are more close to each other than Dr. Pezeshkian was with his opponent. So again, I stress that these two presidents, the late President Raisi and the President-elect Pezeshkian, have quite a lot in common, despite the fact that they are supposedly from two different political camps. These camps in Iran are very broad, and the word principalist and reformist really don't mean very much.
Right. I watched the debates during the election campaign, and Pezeshkian was referring that he wants to bring a balance in Iran's foreign policy. He even mentioned the very famous slogan of Khamenei, neither East nor West, the Islamic Republic Iran. He said, if I'm not wrong, that we cannot be enclosed in a cage. if I'm not wrong. Can you reflect on that?
Yes, I think that he was criticizing his competitor, who he felt was taking an unbalanced approach and was basically shutting the door to the West, in his view, in the view of President-elect Pezeshkian, and was looking to the global South, which he agrees with, but he believed that his finalist competitor was unwilling to see or seek opportunities to improve ties with the West. Again, that's why I think that President-elect Pezeshkian is more similar to President Raisi, because President Raisi too sought to see if the West was willing to change its behavior. And we had nuclear negotiations 2 years ago, which I participated in, and we almost reached a deal. The European Union Foreign Policy Chief Joseph Borrell said the Iranian demands were reasonable, and he was waiting for the Americans to reply, and the Americans never gave their final response. So 2 years ago, 2 years and a few weeks, 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, we had a deal, but the Americans refrained from accepting it. So again, I stress that I think that Dr. Pezeshkian is taking a centrist position, and therefore I think it's fair to assume that when it comes to foreign policy, we will have a large degree of continuity. Whereas if his finalist opponent had won, we would have probably tilted further away from any substantial talks with the West.
It's really interesting that Masoud Pezeshkian from start said that he will adhere to the three foreign policy principles of Ali Khamenei: dignity, wisdom, and expediency. By the way, you have co-authored a very interesting chapter on Khamenei's strategic thought. So it's really interesting that he many times during the election campaign he said that he is loyal and he will follow the general policies of Khamenei.
Yes, I think again that is a centrist position in Iranian politics. We have had a number of administrations where they tilted much to the West or to the East. Under President Khatami, we tilted, I think, a bit too much to the West. Until under President Ahmadinejad, I think we tilted too much away from the West. And again, under President Rouhani, I think, again, we tilted back too much to the West. Under President Raisi, I think the country took a more balanced approach. And I think President-elect Pezeshkian, too, intends to take a more balanced approach. That does not mean that we are not highly critical of the West in Iran, and that does not mean that Dr. Pezeshkian is not highly critical. He has spoken out against the Israeli regime and in support of the Palestinian people, and he is highly critical of the policies that the West has taken in support of genocide in Gaza. But that does not mean that he will shut the doors to negotiations with Western countries.
Is Masoud Pezeshkian an opportunity for the West, in your opinion?
I think that Dr. Raisi was an opportunity for the West, which the West threw away. And I think Dr. Pezeshkian, President-elect Pezeshkian, is another opportunity for the West. But I have a feeling that the West will throw this away too. But we should be optimistic, and perhaps more sane and rational leaders in the West will appear and push for a change in the dynamics of the relationship.
I would like now to change the subject. You have been a very vocal critic of Erdogan's hypocritical stance towards the Gaza war. I've been following your tweets. You have been a steady from start. you demonstrated this double approach, this hypocrisy. You have been very critical of him. What are the prospects for the Iranian-Turkish relations are very complex. They have different folders. In some folders they cooperate, in others they're antagonists. Do you see any prospects now, after the elections?
Iranian-Turkish relations have always been complicated over the past few decades, but the two countries also have a lot in common. We have very strong economic ties. We also have very strong cultural ties. Turkish, the Islam that we see in Turkey is very different from that of Saudi Arabia. It has traditionally been very different from that of the Salafists or Wahhabis, and because it has a strong Sufi element. And Sufism is very similar in many ways to Shia Islam. So the culture in Turkey and the culture in Iran is very similar. However, because of the Turkish president's support for ISIS and Al-Qaeda and other extremist groups in Syria to overthrow the Syrian government, alongside NATO and alongside oil-rich Arab dictatorships and the Israeli regime, we've had many problems with President Erdogan. And now we are pushing, or the Iranians are pushing Turkey to take a more robust approach in supporting the Palestinian people. Mr. Erdogan has said very positive things. He has said the right things, but in practice, he has done very little. Sadly, of course, the Europeans have said the wrong things and have done great evil in supporting the Israeli regime. So it's not as if President Erdogan's position is unique. We see across the Western world governments supporting this Holocaust. We know from more recent reports from The Lancet that the number of people who have died in Gaza directly and indirectly as a result of the genocide may be close to 200,000. Yet the West continues to assist the ethno-supremacist and apartheid regime of Israel. So our problem with Turkey or the Turkish president is not unique. We have a problem with all those countries that continue to have relations with a racist and apartheid regime.
Yeah, but
I have a question, Mr. Lekakis.
Yeah, please.
It seems that NATO is creating its European pillar at the military level to deal with so-called Indo-Pacific. And the United States will focus on China. What does it mean for Iran?
I think that the United States is hurting NATO or NATO countries, specifically European countries, immensely by sacrificing them in an unnecessary conflict with Russia, a conflict that could be resolved through peaceful means. But the United States has a tradition of zero-sum games, and therefore they do not understand compromise. We in Iran have seen that with Americans for many decades. The Americans, whenever they compromise, they cheat. They cheated Iran with the nuclear program. They cheated over the negotiations to bring about peace in Ukraine, the Minsk Accords. The Americans are not answerable to international law. They see themselves as above the law, and so they are sacrificing Europe, and I think that they will continue to do so. Europe is going to move towards greater poverty. greater dependency on the United States. The Europeans could have had a much better relationship with Iran, but under American intimidation, they refused to change the dynamics of the relationship. So Europe is becoming rapidly marginalized. Europe continues to support the oppressive Israeli regime, a regime that has no moral legitimacy, even though people in Europe are protesting and people are seeing what the regime is doing, but the elites, which are very closely bound to the United States, are continuing to pursue these policies. And this is creating animosity across the world and destroying Europe's soft power and the soft power of the West. So I think that Europe could have taken a much better approach. It could have remained a more wealthy continent, but I think the Americans really don't care about the fate of Europeans. They simply want to control Europe.
Another one question. If Trump will elected, do you believe that something will change in relations Iran and the United States?
That will depend on the United States. We have been very flexible in the past. When we signed the nuclear deal, Iran abided by all of its commitments. The International Atomic Energy Agency, in 15 different reports over the years, acknowledged that. But under Obama, the United States constantly violated the deal, and so did Europe. And then under Trump, the United States ultimately tore up the deal. And even after the United States tore up the deal, Iran continued to abide by its commitments in full for a whole year. And the Europeans did nothing. And only after a whole year did Iran gradually decrease its commitments, implementing its commitments to put pressure on the Europeans, but the Europeans still did nothing. The world has changed today. The global south is on the rise. Countries like Iran, Russia, China, India are growing. And there's no doubt that the West is on the relative decline. If and when Trump comes to power, he will have many troubles at home, not only the deep divide in the United States, but also an economic crisis that is growing with a huge debt and the out-of-control printing of money that we're seeing there. But also, he is, because of the aggressive posturing of the United States, going to have to deal with many potential adversaries: China, Russia, Iran, people across West Asia, and elsewhere. The United States has overstretched itself. And I think that whether it's Trump or Biden or someone else, the United States is going to recognize ultimately that they are no longer the global superpower. And if that they continue down the same road, they will lose on all fronts.
Alexis.
Our last question. How do you evaluate Iran's relations with the Greek world, namely with Greece and Cyprus? We know that historically we have good relations. Especially in the 90s and the late 90s, Greece, Armenia, and Iran had established a trilateral. And there were reports at the time that Greece was even flirting with Iran in a defense cooperation. On top of that, as far as Cyprus is concerned, Iran has a principled stance. It supports the reunification of Cyprus. It adheres to all the UN resolutions in favor of the reunification of Cyprus. It's against the partition of the island. It's against the two-state solution. It's in favor of the one-state solution of the Republic of Cyprus. I remember that in 2016, the then Speaker of the Iranian Parliament, Ali Larijani, said that Cyprus was the closest country to Iran from the European Union. What has changed from then now? And shall we connect it with the recent threats of Hassan Nasrallah?
When I was a PhD student, my closest friends on campus were Greek students and one Italian student. We were very similar in our worldview, and we were very similar in culture, even though I'm a Shia Muslim and they were Orthodox Christians. And although they weren't practicing, but we were very similar in many ways. I visited Cyprus twice. I've been to campus there, and I had very good relations with the staff and students, and I felt very much at home. But I think the biggest problem is the United States, without a doubt. That again forces European countries to take positions that are not in their interests. They are in the interests of the United States. And so Europe has to sacrifice itself for the United States. Secondly, I think that Cyprus, which has a strong tradition of opposing the hegemon in the United States and its excessive influence in Cyprus, in Greece. The Greek people have always had a strong sense, or at least many Greeks have always had a strong sense of independence. But despite all that, I think that Greek politicians, by and large, have allowed a racist colonial apartheid regime, which is openly carrying genocide and has been slowly carrying out genocide for decades. It has allowed it to thrive, and it refuses to take a stand. And that has harmed the relationship immensely. The West always likes to criticize Iran, but I have no problem in stating very openly that when we look at the facts, the side that has been immoral has been the West, whether it's in Gaza or Syria, whether it's in Libya or Iraq, whether it's Afghanistan or Yemen or Venezuela or Cuba. The United States has carried out infinite crimes, and the Europeans have closed their eyes. And my expectation as a citizen of Iran is that the people of Greece would take a stronger stance and that the Greek government would take a stronger stance. We are critical of Turkey because it talks the talk, but it won't go any further than talking. The expectation for us is that countries like Greece, which have a strong non-Western culture and which has a lot in common with the people across the Mediterranean, would open their eyes and see what's happening to the women and children of Gaza and refuse to allow this to be carried out in their name.
Thank you, Alexis.
Thank you very much,
Thank
Professor.
you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.